and welcome to Washington Central. I am Saurabh Shukla. Xi Jinping's two-front strategy of calming America, confronting India is something that we are talking about today. Why are we talking about this subject? Obviously, China and India's relationship, China's relationship with the US are of geopolitical interest. But something which has happened recently has caught the attention of the world. Xi Jinping dialed US President Donald Trump, and there is a likelihood of a state visit from the US and the Chinese visit to White House sometime in 2026. Uh, on India's point, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi had a summit meeting with Xi Jinping in Tianjin, but even then, China is now provoking India by questioning Arunachal Pradesh as part of India's territory. Xi Jinping is trying to repair relationship with the US while at the same time quietly increasing pressure in India. It's part of a Chinese grandstanding and a devious strategy. Is this mixed signaling or is it deliberate grand strategy? We're going to talk about that today in Washington Central. We will break down what China really wants from India and the US. Why is that Beijing is behaving in this manner with two of the most important countries across the globe? And why New Delhi remains a pressure point while it's trying to appease Washington? As they say, the Chinese never do anything beyond their own self-interest. They follow Sun Tzu's art of war and clearly wants to make sure that they remain the dominant global power. Uh, while when it comes to China and the US, the recent rapprochement has also meant that there have been high-level US-China meetings lately, military hotlines have reopened and climate talks have resumed, all signaling outreach to Washington. There is also a sense that the Chinese want to give small concessions to Donald Trump to try and win favor, especially when it comes to things like technology, AI chips, which US has put, I would say, a strong lid on, which has in some ways stalled China's AI ambitions. But why is this part of the entire US-China dialogue critical? China's economy is under real stress. That's one of the primary reasons why it wants a rapprochement with the United States. Its property sector has virtually collapsed. There is a crisis of sorts where the young people don't have employment. And also the Chinese companies are pressing Xi Jinping's regime because of slowing exports. And also they are not getting access to the critical chips which they need desperately to win the AI war. And for that, they are willing to give US limited wins when it comes to things like critical minerals. And that's the reason why he's dialing up the US President Donald Trump. Obviously, they need predictable financial flows, access to the Western markets, and that's pivotal. That can only happen if the US decides to go slow or go soft on its China policy. And that's the reason why suddenly there is a certain Chinese surge, whether it is through the business interests, through the Chinese companies, they're trying to put pressure. And obviously, Xi Jinping realizes that President Trump needs some kind of cajoling, needs some kind of courting. And that's what they're doing by dialing up White House and also trying to send out a message that it wants a rapprochement. It also wants to ease pressure on Taiwan. China realizes that the more aggressive stance by the US on Taiwan will also not only scuttle its global ambition, but also diminishes its powers in Asia. And that's the reason why they continue to engage with the US, despite the fact they know that US continues to be their primary competitor because China, in its ultimate aim, and that's what Xi Jinping's aim is, wants to be the global leader. While with the US, what they're trying to do is that Xi is trying to buy time, money, and technology. That's the three pillars that I believe that are critical if you have to assess in a nutshell, the Chinese strategy towards the US. But that brings me to my next question. Why does China keeps on provoking India? What does it gain? With India, the goal, if you ask me, is something else. The goal is very different. It sees India as a dominant Asian power, a dominant neighbor, which it wants to dominate strategically. So whether it's Doklam, whether it's continuous pricking of India, it wants controlled instability. In fact, the entire war that happened, Operation Sindoor, it was China which was backing Pakistan from behind, providing its weapons, egging it on. And I had said it earlier as well that is the devious Chinese hand that was at play. It also wants to do regional signaling by pricking India that it can dominate India to other countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, even Bangladesh. It also wants to tie India down militarily because it knows that if it ties India down militarily, it can then dominate the economic game over India. It then forces India into defensive positioning when it comes to China. Clearly, it's also testing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's military and political resolve that how far will he go? He uh, went to Tianjin thinking that Chinese will reciprocate, but that's clearly not happened. They have backstabbed India, and that's happened earlier in the standoffs when it comes to Ladakh, Galwan, when Prime Minister offered a hand of friendship, and the Chinese responded by these, I would say, deadly skirmishes on the Indo-China boundary. Uh, China also realizes that does not want to escalate into a full scale conflict, but it wants to keep on pricking India. It also wants to demonstrate to the world that India continues to be an unstable country where the economic majors should not be investing. So these are all part of a deliberate strategy. That's the reason why the statement of the Chinese Foreign Ministry has come out now, because there's nothing that the Chinese do which is not well thought out of. And clearly, the statement saying that Arunachal Pradesh is a part of China is part of that deliberate design. It also knows that there's a vacuum with US India trade talks still stalled. The trade deal has not happened. So that's the reason I call this a controlled pressure. Or if you ask me, the Chinese have this whole strategy of a strategic timeout. On one hand, they want to talk to you. On the other hand, they want to make sure that they try to undercut you. So they will use this strategic timeout, whether with the US or countries like India. And it has happened. There are enough and more strategic examples, if you ask me, because China continues to buy time to make sure that it rearms itself, whether winning the military race or whether winning the AI tech race, because they know that when they engage a country, certainly some of the measures of reciprocity kick in. And democracies act in a different way. They once they commit to something, US and India will walk the talk. With China's case, they can continue to be talking to you, but they can be adversarial at the same time. With India, the strategy is it continues to use smaller, frequent pinpricks rather than dramatic announcements. It will not go into a full scale war because it wants India to be engaged, but on the same hand, it wants to prick India. But with America, there's a clear chip war happening. It needs American technology to power its economy. That's the reason why it's kind of quoting US President Donald Trump, because he knows that he has a clear grip. He has told the AI companies, the dominant AI companies like Nvidia, not to sell the critical chips to China. And clearly, it wants some kind of a leeway there. It also wants to break this entire alliance. Quad already is in a disarray. China sees this as a game to destabilize that by telling US that it wants talks with the US on its own terms, and it does not want US to interfere in the South China Sea. That's a part of that makes Beijing uncomfortable. And it in the past it has felt that US, Japan, Australia, India coming together is not comfortable for Beijing and creates I would say, barriers for its global power ambitions. What does this mean for the world? Certainly, the US, China, and India equation has a major bearing on the geopolitics of the globe. The strategy impacts supply chains, if you ask me, defense spending, all that is all linked, and obviously trade realignment. So this has an impact on the global market, how these countries are behaving, whether they are having a rapprochement with each other, whether they are having a tussle. All this impacts the global market as well. For the US, China will continue to be polite in the near term. That's my prediction, so to say, because they want to be diplomatic and transactional with the US, but will continue its military over build up quietly. That's what has been China's game plan. That what it continues to engage its rivals in talks, but will do its build up quietly. For India, border tension will continue to simmer. We should not think that post Tianjin, post restarting flight links with China, things will be fine. China will continue to be a dominant, I would say, adversary for India in times to come. You can never have friendship with China because China believes that India can inhibit China's global ambitions. And being a democracy also has its strength. Being a big global market has its strength. India has a great startup culture, which is also posing threat to China. And now with manufacturing bases shifting, China, if you ask me, will only intensify its war against India. We are not moving, if you ask me, towards a world of peace or war. We are moving into an era of managed rivalry where China will continue to court US in the near future, but will continue to break countries like India, which pose threat to its global power ambition. That's what, if you ask me, is the sum of the big news headlines when it comes to on the geopolitical front. We will have to wait and watch how this summit meeting, when it will happen next year, goes on between US and China. How soon can India and the US sign a trade deal? All this will have an impact on this power equation. But this isn't about friendship or hostility. It's about timing and leverage. As I said earlier, that China wants stability with the US to fulfill its own ambitions on going ahead, of winning the AI race, which it desperately wants to win. And it knows that it cannot win this race till the time US eases pressure on China. And that's the reason why, for strategic advantage, it's trying to quote US President Donald Trump. Uh, and for the rest of the world, this means that we are entering a decade of quiet confrontation with these big rivals, especially when it comes to China and India and US and China. It will be a time of careful diplomacy, but one thing is very clear, that we are also looking at a big game changing geopolitical equation where the countries of the world will engage with each other for short term objectives than a long term strategic objective. That is it for today. If you like strategic breakdowns like this, share this episode and stay tuned for the next global power shift. Thanks for watching, and do follow Washington Central and do rate us on whatever podcast platform that you're watching us.